Well, is lowering my car payment always a good thing? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, one of the biggest opportunities to lower your payments might just be sitting right in your driveway. You know, we talk a lot about refinancing a home, but we rarely talk about refinancing your automobile. And this is what we're going to focus on today. But mainly, we're going to be focusing on is a lower payment. Is it always a good thing? Is it something you want to refinance your loan and take advantage of? So we're going to talk about that. As you know, you can always call in a question. Go to the website and ask a question. And that's at prudentmoney.com. Just go to the top of the page. You'll see a link. Click through, and then there will be a place for you to add a question and send it on over to me. I'd love to get those questions and help in any way I can. So I've got a question for you, one that you probably don't think of at all. You just make those payments like we all do on our cars. But what is the interest rate that's driving the loan that's paying for that car and at some point will be paid off? I mean, at least that's the one good thing about a car note. If done the right way, at least you have a beginning and an end date, and you know when that car is paid off. And if you can get past the temptation of going and buying a new, but first, before we think about the end game, before we think about that debt being paid off, we really have to focus in and say, am I paying too high of an interest rate? You know, it's really interesting. The the credit scores of consumers, say 5 to 10 years ago, versus today. I mean, that there is a large part of today's consumer base, don't know what the percentage is, but the point is that have really done the things necessary to improve upon their credit. You know, one thing that improves upon your credit is just time. And you go through and you're paying those monthly bills, you're paying those minimum payments. Hopefully you're paying more than those minimum payments. And you get to this spot where you all of a sudden look down. You really haven't taken a look at it in a while. That's not the best way to go about doing it, but it's what a lot of people do. But you get to a point to where you look at it and you go, wow, I only have 5 more months left or 6 more months left, or I'm about to get to 12 months being out from having a car that's paid off. And I got to tell you that, yes, people often, and I'm guilty here, people often make not the best choices when it comes to spending money on cars. But I think that you're getting to where you're seeing a population that's shifting to where they would rather have a car sitting in the driveway that is all paid off than always fighting the payment. And so what you've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is really interesting because you've seen credit scores come up. And you've also, at the same time, unfortunately, you've seen interest rates come up, as we know. And then you've seen a lot of inflation in automobiles go up. And people continue to still pay for cars. And they do it by extending out those terms, taking them out to 84 months. I mean, adding more years. And of course, you got to realize what that does. That adds more interest and cost that you have to pay for to get those notes finally paid for. So although your credit score is going up, and you're probably paying attention a little bit to that, but most people aren't putting two together and saying, you know what, I'm a whole different consumer today than I was when I bought this car. And if you do the right things, you could get out of this car note a lot quicker than you ever imagined. And it all comes down to the cost of the car, or the cost of the loan that drives the car, no pun intended. And that is that interest rate so high that if we brought it down quite a bit, would it make a difference? And that's what we have to ask. Is lowering my car payments always a good thing? We'll come back to this. Now, let's talk a little bit about creditors And when you go and you sit in the finance room, which and I've said this before, it's worth saying again, if you're going in to buy a car, there's one thing I think that's a prerequisite that you have to do. You have to get yourself pre-qualified before you go and buy the car. And I know that that's one of those extra steps most people don't want to make because it's a little bit of a hassle. In fact, the whole car buying experience can be somewhat of a hassle. By the time you get in and out of there, you with a lot more stress than you did when you came into the process. And you're off with your new car. Hopefully, you love it for years to come. And incidentally, I want to throw in there something that I've learned the hard way. If you buy a car the right way, if it's not an impulsive buy, and that's what always I think just kind of blows me away, is to think that someone can just walk off the street and make that kind of financial commitment right there on the spot, a high interest rate, but you got the car you wanted and you're paying it forever, but you still got the car that you want. If you go through the process the correct way based on stewardship principles, you don't have that kind of stress at any point during the process because you know you're doing it the right way from a stewardship perspective. So always keep that in mind. I always have to remind myself if I go in to do something like that and there's just stress and there's pressure, then maybe I need to take a step back and say, well, God, what are you trying to tell me? That's the better way, the stewardship based way to do this. So let's talk a little bit about what the creditor is going to look for. As I was starting to go down this road a second ago, and I started talking about dealerships, and let me get back to that point, is that it's so very important, and I'll tell you why, to get your financing approved before you go to the dealership, because not only do you have a bargaining chip, you can say, well, you say that you can give me 8 or 9%. I've got a 6.5% rate right here already approved. And by the way, if the dealership tells you that they don't do business with it, I actually had a dealership tell me this one time. They said one of the biggest credit unions in the country, and they don't do business with them. I said I called them up and I said if I take this note and sign the dotted line, will you refinance it? And that might have been my first experience of going through the refinancing process, and it's one that most people don't think of. Once they sign the dotted line, that doesn't mean they can't take that and transfer it into another note and refinance it. It's just, I mean, the values and everything have to be there. Most of the time they are, but it's always an available option. So keep that in mind. But the very first thing they're looking for is credit score information. And that is a big part of what drives this decision process. However, it's not the only thing that drives the process. If you go with, let's start at below 600, and the credit score, we're looking at 600 as a floor, and then we're looking at 760 and above as excellent. If you're below 600, if you get this car refinanced, it's probably going to be at a much, much, much higher interest rate, say 18, 19%, which is what you don't want to do when you've got refinance rates in the single digits. They're just waiting for you with a better credit score. And by the way, there are steps you can take, things you can do to bring that credit score up. And in my book, I go through every single step that you can take to improve that credit score. But if you're at below 600 or below, it's considered poor. 600 to 639 is below average. There's some options that are available. Generally, once again, very, very, very high rates. 640 to 679 is fair, can refinance, but rate improvement must be limited. 680 to 719 is good. Good refinancing possibilities. What they call what you're shooting for is a 720 or above, which is very good. 720 to 759 usually qualifies for very competitive rates. 760 plus is excellent, and it goes well into the 800s. Best chances at the lowest available rates. So when we're looking at these cars or whoever you're dealing with looks at your cars because you want to refinance it, they are looking at a lot of different things just beyond the credit score. In addition to the credit score, they're looking at the age of the car, how old it is, how old's the mileage, excuse me, how much mileage is on the car. They're looking at the current loan to value ratio, meaning how much the car is worth, how much are you financing. If you are in a situation where you are, when you're underwater in a situation with your car, in other words, you owe more than it's worth, and that definitely plays into it. And of course, they're looking at this car and seeing how many wrecks the car's been. If that lowers the value. It's really interesting when you look at the whole idea of what is the car worth, what's the value of the car. There's a lot of prominent websites you can go to, and you can plug in your information, and they can tell you exactly what the car's worth. But since the great financial crisis occurred back in 2008, most the car business started valuing cars a whole lot differently, and it came down to, you could go to kbb.com, which is Kelley Blue Book, which is a very prominent source of information on what a car is actually worth. But even below that is the everyday changing price of a car at auction, and this is where people, mostly dealers, bring their inventory or bring up a car. They'll have it bid upon. People will try to win the car, and then you've heard the expression, I bought this car at auction. That can be a good thing. It can work out great, or it could be a bad thing because you don't really know all the history of what this car's been through. But it is probably the truest value of a car, just because it's what the dealerships are willing to pay for it. And I remember back in what a horrible time it was for car dealerships. In fact, a real good friend of mine, his family business and car dealership, been in his family for decades upon decades. And I remember they were shut down, actually, by the brand name that they carried, and kind of a whole sordid deal. But that's always left an impression on my mind. Number one, that could happen out of their control. This brand name, I won't mention who it was, shut them down. And, a very reputable company, they weren't doing anything wrong. It's just the way things were going. But I remember him telling me is that when people would bring cars in to sell them to the dealers, to a dealer because they needed to get the money, they would, the dealer would go and look at what the auction prices were, which were way, way below. It's gotten a whole lot better. There's a little bit less distance between what you're going to find on a Auto Trader or a kbb.com or cars.com, anything like that, and find out exactly what they think the value is. But the truth is the value is in that range, and it's important to know that before you go through the process of refinancing. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. We're up against a break. Stick around, and I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory in the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9 right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. We're talking about changing your automobile loans up, refinancing them like you would do a house. and how they can be a beneficial thing for you, but it can also be just another financial setback or end up being another setback. What we're looking at is really two main aspects or three main aspects of a car note. First one being you have the value of the vehicle, which you're going to settle in, and that's what you've agreed to pay. You have the interest rate, which is something we want to get low as possible, and then you've got the term that car loan is going to last. So all three of these have to work together, and somehow, as I said in the first part of the program, somehow everybody's got to get paid, make commissions, pay for buildings, pay for big dealerships, and all that good stuff. So what you're not wanting to do is go in and refinance a car note and make things worse for yourself, which would be the first thing that you don't want to do. Is say, yeah, I think I'm going to refinance, and we've talked about the reasons that people can refinance today when they maybe or could get this lower rate today they couldn't get back, 5, 10, 15 years ago because their credit's gotten a lot better. So, what you don't want to do is get in a situation where you say, you know what, I'm going to take my loan. You already said I can refinance my debt at a lower rate. So how far out can I take it, and how much lower can my payment be? And this is where mistake number one is you're looking at that payment and you're trying to determine how much can I save off of my cash flow and make this still make sense. Well, it truly would take some really we'll just call them interesting calculations to make this work. The math works. You can do the math, but to go in and refinance and then load up, I've seen people do this where they'll have the car is worth $30,000 and they have a $15,000 note on it, and they refinance this and they bring that debt value up to $30,000. So you have a $30,000 car that has a $30,000 debt on it. And by the way, if you take that much equity out of a car like that, your interest rate's going to go back up some because that definitely brings into one of those risk factors we were talking about. So you don't want to fall into the trap of either doing that, taking money, a cash refi, which is a very popular phrase in the mortgage business, where you take the house, you refinance the debt balance, and then you take out more debt, and you include that into the current debt balance in some kind of a loan structure, and now you've got a bigger debt problem because you refinanced your house. Same thing can happen with a refinance of a car. You cover the original debt, and then you add as much additional debt to it as the credit union or bank will allow you to, and voila, you've got new debt on top of old debt, probably at a lower cost. And then you look at it and you go, I think I'll take mine out another couple of years. You don't want to do that either. The best way to handle this is to say, I've got this amount of debt. You obviously go to a credit union or a bank, which we'll talk about that here in a second, and you tell them that you want to refinance your car, but you don't want to add any debt to it, and you don't want to add any years to it. So if you can resist the urge to take the lower payment and continue on with the payment that you're already making and you've been making for a couple of years now, you'll get out of that debt quicker than you can imagine. You'll wake up one day and go, wow, I only have 2 months, 3 months left to go, and I've got a car that's completely paid off. It's a great feeling and one you should shoot for. It does take a lot of discipline to walk into a bank or a credit union and say, I want to refinance this note, knowing that you could turn it into a bigger debt. And then knowing you could take that money in a check, put it in your savings account, take it and spend it or whatever you want to do with it. It's tempting. It's very tempting, but you've got to look for more strength and commitment to being a prudent steward to pull off the process. For some people, it's a piece of cake. People who refinanced their auto loans in Q1, which is the first quarter in 2026, lowered their interest rate by an average of 2.2 percentage points from 10.29 to 8.05. And of course, they're looking this as a whole. I've seen much better offers of interest rate. Of course, they're looking at a group of people which is going to have higher interest rates. But even then, a 10.29 to 8.05 is pretty good. It reduced their monthly payments by an average of $81. That's $972 a year in improved monthly cash flow. As long as you don't do any of the trickery and make it bigger or make it where you're taking more debt out. Remember that. Even more interesting, borrowers refinancing through credit unions reduced their payments by an average of $101 per month versus $60 through banks. Credit unions handled more than 63% of auto refinancings in the quarter. And we're going to talk about that and really dive into why they could be the best choice for refinancing. Hopefully, we probably won't get to it today, but we will definitely get to it tomorrow. Here's some other things to consider. The average new car payment is now $770 a month. Used is $531 a month. That's really pretty amazing. The average amount financed on a new vehicle is $43,925. For used vehicles, it's $27,070. That seems a little bit low, but we'll go with it. More than 35% of new car loans now run longer than 6 years. We're going the wrong way, folks. For used vehicles, it's more than 31%. A used car borrower with a 781 plus credit score is averaging about 6.3%. Now, there's a number we want to look at. While someone in the 601 to 660 range is averaging 14.03%. And that is just an absolutely high rate of interest being paid on a higher debt balance that it's just going to take a while to pay off. And the amount of money that you're paying for that is pretty tough. At the lower end, borrowers with scores of 501 to 600 are averaging an extraordinary 19.42% on used car loans. I got to tell you, if you find yourself in a situation like that, where you're trying to buy a car and at the same time make the payment, I don't know what the payment on that is, but if you look at that and versus trying to go up a couple levels to a newer car, you'll find it better to just find something that runs, find something that's in good shape, that's been taken care of, and be able to take care of your transportation needs. I guess it comes down to, are we talking transportation needs or are we talking lifestyle needs? That's a tough question to come up against and really do some thinking about. But as I've always said, and we talk about a lot, you got to ask the right questions. And I think the right question is, does a lower car payment necessarily mean you're saving money? You take a payment that you're making, say you're paying $700 on a car note, and you get it down to $525 on a car note. Is that a good deal? Well, it depends on how you structured the debt. If you structured it just by you're taking out your remaining months of payments at a lower rate and paying a lower car payment for it, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. However, if you take that note like we talked about and you put another couple of years on the end of it to bring that lower payment down, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing just because you have a lower interest rate. That's what you got to, and the thing is, there's very few people that are going to point that out to you. There's very few people that are going to say, maybe you should consider this. They're ready to get a refinance going. And I'm not talking about everybody. It's just they're there to get these loans done. And that kind of goes with the territory sometimes. So the question that you want to have is, can I lower my interest rate without unnecessarily extending the amount of time I'm in debt? So if you were before the note, if you are going to be out of debt in 2 years, you want to refinance the note and do whatever you have to do to continue to be out of debt in 2 years. Or you could even pay a little bit more to that note, like up to the original amount you were paying, and get out of debt even quicker. Lots of ways to do this. Just make sure that you're making a good, prudent decision when it comes to refinancing your automobile. Now, tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about, is it better to go with a bank versus a credit union? I think some of this information you'll find very interesting and maybe open your eyes to a few things. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.